I'm going to deal with the history of Yardley chronologically, and that makes some sense. Every once in a while, it gets a little funky, but bear with me. Yardley is defined by its water. We have the Delaware River, we have Lake Afton, and we have the Delaware Canal. We're truly blessed with water as long as it's behaving. Lenape lived here for thousands of years before the settlers from Europe arrived. In England, King Charles II's debt to Admiral William Penn defined how our area was settled. William Penn, Admiral Penn's son, received 45,000 square miles of land in 1681, and he immediately went about attracting investors and settlers for the New World. In keeping with his Quaker principles in 1682, Penn entered into purchase agreements with the Lenape that brought lands deeded to his proprietorship under his absolute title. And this is a rather famous painting depicting William Penn with the Lenape. This is a map that shows William Penn's land grants. There's my handy dandy marker, I hope. There. Okay. You'll see along the Delaware River, everybody got some river frontage, and then their land ran back inland in narrow strips. And right in here, in a circular fashion, you have Newtown. Okay. Here's a close-up of those grants, and you'll see William Yardley, okay, and the other grantees going south, John Clowes, John Brock. Okay. William Yardley was a Quaker in England who had been imprisoned for sharing his beliefs, so he was ready to come to America. He purchased 500 acres for 10 pounds sterling from William Penn, and according to the Yardley family genealogy, the purchase was made just 16 days after William Penn received the land. Okay. William Yardley, his wife Jane, three sons, Enoch, William, and Thomas, and a servant sailed to America aboard the ships the Friend's Adventure. William was 50 years old at the time. In 1682, they settled on his land, which is now located along Dolington Road, on the north side of Dolington Road, and named it Prospect Farm. This picture, of course, is taken much later. Okay. William Yardley was described as a farmer and a minister. He was influential. In May of 1683, he was among the 7 Quakers who established the Falls Monthly Meeting of Friends. He represented Bucks County in the first colonial assembly. He was an active member of the provincial council. He was a Bucks County Justice of the Peace. And up until the year before he died, he was the sheriff. Okay. Oh. Oops, didn't want to go that far yet. Back. Thank you. Okay. Wife Jane was the first of the family to die. And after her death in 1691, William, her husband, bequeathed his properties to his sons. Enoch got half of the farm, and the other 2 boys got the other quarters. William himself died in 1693, in quotes, being weak of body by some infirmities. You will read many, many, many times that William Yardley and his entire family died of smallpox. This isn't so. Jane of natural causes, William of natural causes, but smallpox did arrive in the plague of 1702. Um, Brothers Enoch and Thomas died of smallpox on the same day, November 23rd, 1702. Their wives survived and they remarried. All five of their children were dead by January of 1703, all of one of them by smallpox. And brother William, who was unmarried, died in December of 1702, and thus ended the line of William Yardley in America. Okay. Enoch Yardley died without a will, and the Prospect Farm property reverted to his heirs-in-law in England. Thomas Yardley, who was nephew of the original William Yardley, came to America in 1704 with power of attorney for his father Thomas and brother Samuel to sell the Prospect Farm property and settle the estate. And here's a little aside. It would have been really helpful had they used different first names in this family. There are far too many Thomases and Williams. Okay, so Thomas comes over to sell. Three other Quakers were instructed to take part in the transaction. Um, the group eventually sold Prospect Farm in May of 1710. So a little time lag there, to Thomas Janney for 350 pounds. 19 days later, Thomas bought the property back from Janney for the same amount of money.
Hmm.
Okay. Thomas Yardley had purchased additional lands. So he brought some money over with him. Um, the additional land included that of John Brock, the another William Penn grantee, and John Brock's land was in the section that is now essentially downtown Yardley. Okay. So Brock had established a grist mill and a mill pond, which is today Lake Afton. And Thomas Yardley bought John Brock's grist mill, the pond, etc., in 1705. This photo shows the grist mill as it would have appeared in 1769 when it was well into its ownership in the Yardley family. Thomas Yardley didn't wait a long time um, to establish himself permanently here in America. He married Anne Biles in 1706, and they had 9 children. By marrying Anne Biles, he was doing very well. His, her family was quite wealthy. Thomas Yardley secured the license for a river ferry in 1728. And he had the stone mansion house, Lanrick Manor, um, built at that time. And Lanrick Manor is along the river on River Road between College Avenue and Letchworth Avenue. The ferry that he operated ran anywhere from Afton Avenue up to Letchworth. Thomas Yardley owned all that land at the time, so whatever was a good landing spot at the time was probably where the ferry landing was. Okay. And in 1728, he built his own rather grand home, Lakeside, appropriately named because it sat right by Lake Afton. Okay. This is an interesting photo in that here's Lakeside, okay, on North Main Street, and here's North Main, and we're on the other side of the street, and here's water. So originally the mill pond didn't stop at Main Street, it ran directly to the grist mill. In the 1970s, the mill pond was filled in essentially in the dark of night, and it's a parking lot today, a big grist mill parking lot. Parcels of land were sold, and more people came to settle. Among the earliest houses in Yardley were those on Canal Street. The three-story, one, two, three, called Father, Son, Holy Ghost houses, were among the earliest. They were constructed from early to mid 1700s, and on these houses, the front doors faced toward Main Street. You don't see them at all today, but the original front doors were on the other side of these buildings. This house on South Main, now Dreyfus Opticians, was built in 1794.
Oh.
As more people arrived, had children, of course, a school was needed. This photo shows the octagonal schoolhouse built on Oxford Valley Road in Lower Makefield Township in the 1770s. Children from town went to that school until a similar school was built at Oak Grove, where the American Legion on South Main Street is today. But we don't have a picture of that. Okay. Early on, we had the Union Meeting House, built in 1827. It was a non-denominational gathering place used by missionaries and traveling ministers. It was taken over actually rather quickly by St. Andrew's Church in 1835. The town officially became known as Yardleyville in 1828 when the post office was opened. And my thought is that in all probability, Yardleyville would not have been called Yardleyville um, had not nephew Thomas come to town. William Yardley simply wasn't here long enough to establish any reputation other than being the original land grantee. So Thomas Yardley, the mover, shaker, and entrepreneur, gained the town's name. The growth of the town was spurred by the opening of the Delaware Canal in 1830, and that was just the section between Bristol and New Hope. This is a lovely, charming photo of the Brock Creek Aqueduct, and you'll see here in the background the bridge on East Afton Avenue, looking north to the kids sitting on the aqueduct structure itself. An aqueduct is a water bridge. Okay. And then helping things right along was the construction of a covered bridge across the Delaware River between 1839 and 1840. This is, of course, is a picture taken late 1800s, and over here you see a structure in Wilbertha, New Jersey. This picture came to light really recently, and up until then we were using a picture of the Washington Crossing Bridge unwittingly. But this is the real Yardley Bridge. Okay. The Delaware Canal and the bridge offered a wealth of business opportunities. Here we are in the Delaware Canal. Yardley had three coal yards where canal boats were pulled by mules, delivering profits. The largest of the coal yards was called Lenape's, and it was at this intersection of East Afton Avenue and Canal Street. And see here a hinge boat, a boat that came in two sections, being unloaded via this pulley bucket system. Okay. The canal workers needed supplies. They only had a little 8 by 10 foot cabin in the back of the boat, no refrigeration. They couldn't carry much, so they had to buy things along their way from Easton to Bristol. Here in Yardley, there was a general store along the canal on East Afton Avenue and run by Aaron LaRue, a Quaker. And it is said, cited many times, that Aaron LaRue essentially ran a stop on the Underground Railroad for slaves traveling by canal boat. And sometimes the canalers didn't want to sleep in that little hole in their boat, and they spent the night in hotels. This building is directly opposite the general store and was first called the Shoemaker Hotel and then later the Lafarge Hotel. Merchants opened business. This painting depicts Quality Row, which was an attached series of buildings where merchants had their businesses below and they lived above. Okay. Temperance houses were built for those who were thirsty. Samuel Slack operated a temperance house in Yardley in 1845. His son Aaron secured a license to operate a hotel in 1866. He fulfilled the requirements of a hotel by constructing 4 bedrooms over the barn, fine accommodations. He also had a store and a barber shop. The photo that you're seeing here is of the Continental Hotel, which was built in 1877 after the original Temperance House was destroyed by a fire. And that fire, it said, was caused by the barber burning too much hair in his stove. In the early 1900s, the Continental catered to the tourist trade. Okay. By the Delaware Canal, near the northern extent of the ferry landing, was the White Swan. Okay, again, catering to the ferry trade travelers. In 1958, it became the Yardley Inn. Okay. Now, this is a sort of surprising fact. Methodist church services were held in a general store by the canal first, but in 1838, a brick church was built on South Main Street. It's now gone, but you'll see what happened to it. The Yardley Community Center was built in 1851, but only the rear portion of the building. It was constructed by the Sons of Temperance and housed their headquarters in a private school. The front section was added on in 1878 by the Oddfellows. It was the Cobweb Theater, the Yardley Theater, and a venue for lectures and meetings, dances, and church services. The Yardley Community Center Association purchased the building in 1941, and many of those functions continued after the community center took over. Lots of recollections of people as teenagers going to the community center to dances. Okay. The first Quakers in Yardley traveled to Fawsington to worship. But by 1869, Yardley had enough friends, or Quakers, to establish its own meeting. It was the first in Bucks County not to seat the sexes separately. And you might not recognize this building today because the stucco was taken off. But in 1868, stucco buildings were quite fashionable, and I recently learned that the stone for this building was quarried directly in back of the building. And the friends got the stone essentially for free because it was so small. So when you walk past this building, which is on the College of South Main, I'm sorry, on the corner of College Avenue and South Main, look at the stones and notice how many of the stones are really small.
Mm.
1874, a two-story elementary and secondary school was built on College Avenue on the hill. It burned down in 1916, perhaps by a youthful arsonist who wanted to avoid taking the test the next day. And you'll notice that there's separate doors for the boys and the girls. And this must have been a muddy section. Okay. The momentous occurrence in Yardley Borough, much anticipated, was a railroad line going through in 1876, and it was built specifically to transport visitors from New York City to the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition. Specific purpose for that line, but a great boon. This is what the train station looked like. Okay, you had the depot and you had a waiting area on the other side. Um, when the Reading Railroad decided to take down the station, the Historical Association made the plea to save the waiting depot, and it now sits down in the parking lot, still preserved. They take good care of it. SEPTA takes good care of it. Okay. Um, with the coming of the railroad, the southern end of town was developed with large, fashionable Victorian-style homes. The center of Yardley filled in. I love this photograph. Um, here you have the Yardley Community Center,
No, that's not.
the Ella Moon House, which was the Yardley Medical Center and now just houses some buildings. All this ornamentation, etc., has been removed. And then you have a house that was called Wheat Sheaf for the decorative ironwork on the second floor balcony, and the Blaker House. Wheat Sheaf, the Blaker House are gone, and you'll see what's taken its place. This is probably early 1900s, and in that buggy was Dr. Henry Lynn Bassett, who was the town doctor, and his horses Skylark and Star provided his horsepower.
Mm.
Oh. Could everybody turn off their um, mute themselves? That would be great. Okay. At the intersection of Main and Afton on the southeast side was the Purcell and Black General Store. Um, since the 1870s, it was a very fancy structure for its time, combining both the Queen Anne and Second Empire Victorian styles. Groceries were sold on the first floor and dry goods and clothing on the second. On the southwest side, there was a general store that burnt down in 1900. The building that you see in this photograph was built in 1901 by a member of the Cadwallader family. And around town, it's probably best known by people who have lived here a while as Beaner's Hardware Store. Beaner's was in operation till 1979. Today, this building is occupied by the refillery. And the building to your left was Casey's store. You'll see they had oysters and cigars. And today, this building is Pretty Bird Coffee. On the north side, west side of Main and Afton intersection was Whisk Corner. Okay. One could buy ice cream and candy and such. It was also the telephone and telegraph office during the 1940s. Um, it was the home to the Orange Blossom Inn, where there was piano playing and singing and dancing going on. An active place. This is a view looking north, showing both Whisk Corner and the Continental Tavern. And you can see the dilemmas of the streets in Yardley. You had some holes going on, some puddles going on, and the trolley tracks going through. And back here, you see that barber pole? And here's a little barber shop. That barber shop today still exists and sits in the backyard of a house down on South Street. Um, the railroad boom coincided with the building of Victorian homes all along Lake Afton. Okay, it was the place to live at the time, and the town's most prominent citizens had homes there. The Twinings, who owned the quarries, the Schwartzlanders, who owned the sawmill by the grist mill, the McCormicks, who owned the duck farm, and the Cadwalladers were all in this row. Okay. In 1877, the African Methodist Episcopal Church was built on South Canal Street. Its congregants had been meeting in a hayloft in a barn since 1817, and it was now time to build a church. Pretty little board and batten structure. Okay. These were banner years, you can tell, can't you? Um, in 1877, the townspeople came together to build a separate structure for their public library. Um, the public library in Yardley began in 1845, and the books were housed on the second floor of the Temperance House, now the Continental, with the owner being the librarian. Then the books were moved to um, two different offices of local lawyers. But in 1877, things were going so well, the town said, yes, we can build our own library. The Cadwalladers donated a small piece of land, and the townspeople contributed the funds, the materials, and the labor to build the original square building that you see in this photo. And there were also swans around. Yardleyville became Yardley because of the railroad. The railroad waged a campaign because the freight bound on their cars for Yardville, New Jersey was being confused with Yardley, Pennsylvania. So in 1883, the U.S. Post Office agreed and made the name change official, and now we are simply Yardley. In 1890, the Union Meeting House was demolished and replaced by the more typical church structure, St. Andrew's Episcopal Church. The Yardley National Bank was established in the 1890s. Um, it went under during the Depression. The building housed a parade of different banks over the years. And today, with an addition, is the Vault Brewing Company. And the vault is still there. Okay. In 1895, the town of Yardley became a borough. Okay. Up until that time, the town was part of Lower Makefield Township. Algernon S. Cadwallader was the first Burgess, which is similar to a mayor. And I'm very excited to say that last week, a descendant of the Cadwallader family brought Algernon Cadwallader's beaver top hat to the old library, and I think he intends to donate it. It was made in London by the purveyor to the late Prince Consort, which would have been Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert. It's a lovely piece. Algernon Cadwallader also had a very small head. It's a very little hat. Okay. Um, the new borough council purchased a small lot on Canal Street and spent about $1,000 to construct council rooms and a lockup because you had to have a lockup. If you look at that house today, down on the lower level at this window, there's still the bars from the lock house showing. Okay. Well, why did the borough become separate from Lower Makefield? Well, the borough townspeople wanted street lights. They wanted streets that weren't full of holes and puddles. They wanted sidewalks and trash collection. The people of the township, though, who were predominantly farmers, didn't need these things, and they certainly didn't want to pay for them. In the 1890s, on the site of what was the sawmill beside the grist mill, Yardley Power and Light built a powerhouse. Okay. The Yardley Morrisville Trenton Street Railway purchased the plant from Yardley Power and Light and powered their trolley line from here. You have a stack, and this is a picture taken in 1940 when the building had been abandoned. And today you might guess from this form that it's the Kramer Bakery CVS building. The Yardley Morrisville Trenton trolley line opened in 1900, later established connections with New Hope and with Newtown. Didn't last long. In 1924, the Yardley Newtown service was suspended. The powerhouse operated until just 1934, and the trolley tracks were torn up in the late 1930s. So it was a short-lived means of transportation. Okay. The Yardley Grist Mill, then called the Yardley Mill Company, burned down in 1900. It was rebuilt in 1901 by Algernon S. Cadwallader. A change was, they added on a third story, and a change was made. Instead of being powered by water wheels using water from Lake Afton, they switched to turbines powered by canal water. Okay. The Yardley Mill Company stopped producing flour in about 1930, but they continued to process livestock and pet feed until the 1940s. And this again is just one of these photos that has so much character with the guys standing in the openings. Okay. 1902, big time. The Cold Spring Bleachery established itself in Yardley. A Philadelphia businessman. The bleachery's purpose was to bleach, dye, and process fabric. And it went on to become Yardley's largest employer, employing about 125 people, and went out of business in early 1970s. In that same year, Century Leather and Enameling Company established its facilities on College Avenue right beside the school. And this is a little hard to imagine because you see all these tables laid out. Okay. On those tables were goat and sheep skins, tanning in the sun. Can you imagine the smell beside the school? On Dolington Road at Prospect Farm, the original William Yardley settle, um, settlement, the Yardley Duck Farm came into being. It was owned by J.C. McCormick, and the farm provided duckling to the finest restaurants in Philadelphia and New York. Um, Yardley duckling had the same reputation that Long Island duckling had. So, Mr. McCormick sold the property in 1948, and then it was returned to residential use by its next owners. Many of the Black residents of Yardley worked at the duck farm. You got, not only pay, but you could take home the duck eggs, a little added benefit. And then we get to floods. Yardley's always had floods. Um, One of the most significant ones was in 1903, and that flood destroyed the wooden covered bridge. The bridge was the crossing was replaced by a steel truss bridge in 1904, again connecting Yardley with Wilburtha, New Jersey. And at that point in time, um, Trenton was Yardley City. Trenton was somewhere where you went to buy clothes, to go do any number of things. And that dominance essentially continued until the 1950s. Okay. This is another good shot of the entrance to the bridge, and on your right is the toll collector's house. And best of all, I like the mattress up on the roof. Now, pressure was on to develop the largely open areas between the canal and the river. And I find this a little strange in that you had a flood in 1903, which covered Yardley from the river to the canal. But then just a couple years later, we're into let's develop that area. It's a good place to live. Okay. The development between Afton Avenue and Letchworth Avenue was called the Flats because it was flat. There were some 18th and 19th centuries home there, but not very many at all. This is a plan, a development plan laying out lots. In 1904, the St. Ignatius Church again constructed a new building. They had been meeting in an old schoolhouse since the 1870s, and this was on South Main Street in this second block on the riverside. Okay. And the other push for development. Two developers from Trenton, Samuel Morgan and Maines Fold from Trenton, bought Rivermar from Mary Yardley, the wife of a Yardley descendant, and marketed that land as being high and dry, which was not at all truthful, and that the people who bought properties, land there, could get to Trenton to the trolley line to get to Trenton in 2 minutes, no matter where they lived on the property, which is again sort of another stretch. Okay. The type of housing developed in Rivermore were essentially bungalows, very fashionable at the time. The marketing was come to Yardley, be along the river, fish and swim, etc. And the Reading Railroad was also promoting Yardley as a tourist destination at that time. Okay. Um, in 1911 and 19 Between 1911 and 1913, a new railroad bridge was constructed over the river, replacing the wrought iron bridge. And you can still see the piers of the old bridge below, even today. Okay. With that construction project came the need for housing for the men, predominantly Irish, who came to build the bridge. On South Canal Street, there were a few houses, but happened was that oh, Charles Eastburn developed twin houses specifically to house the workers. There was also a building which was essentially their mess hall and a social room. And right here, you'll see the AME church. Now we're getting official. Out of that little building down on Canal Street, a borough hall was built in 1916. Um, the building housed council chambers on the second floor. On the first level was fire company number 1. Okay. And you'll notice these really wonderful garage doors and their fire truck. In 1917, the post office established its um, facilities here. Fire Company number 1 occupied the first floor of Borough Hall until 1972. After the old school burnt in 1916 by maybe the kid not wanting to take a test, the school was rebuilt and looks much the same today, though it has smaller cupolas. Okay. Um, it was still both an elementary and secondary school, later became just a high school, and then became an elementary school, and then all the students were moved out to Pennsbury School District facilities. The building today is the home of the Abrams Hebrew Academy. Okay. In 1918, Mary Yardley, who sold Rivermar to the developers, presented a development plan for the land that she owned on the west side of North Main Street. Okay. Um, very, very dense, as you can see. And nothing happened until the 1940s, and what was built was a whole lot less dense than what you're seeing here. And appropriately, because how many fires have we talked about so far in this talk? Yardley had a lot of fires. Yardley Fire Company number two was started in the 1920s, and the companies did indeed compete. Um, After the fire company shut down, the building is best remembered, I think, as Phil Friedman's drugstore and lunch counter. Today, it's home of burritos and another rather new business. So, the neighborhood that Mary Yardley was envisioning in 1918 was developed in the 40s on the west side of North Main Street and is known as Whiskey Hill. On North Main Street, there are a line of small stone houses, which are very distinctive, and they were bought by middle management employees of General Motors over in Trenton. Cold Spring Bleachery Executives, which was right next door to the neighborhood, lived in houses on the back streets in Whiskey Hill. And I bet you want to know why it was called Whiskey Hill. Well, that would apparently came from the trash collectors who collected a lot of whiskey bottles from houses here from residents who'd like to party a lot. That's the story. No stills, just parties. And, uh, coinciding with the opening of U.S. Steel came the development on the west side of South Main Street, Cadwallader Court, Penn Valley Drive, and Lookover Lane. Um, Essentially early 1950s. And then came the Great Flood of 1955, the highest flood that Yardley has ever experienced, where the river water not only met the canal, but overtopped the canal and flowed into the properties on the other side. This is a shot taken from the College Avenue Bridge with people looking down into their now sodden houses. Okay. Um, Half of the bridge over the river was destroyed after a house that had been dislodged in New Hope hit the bridge. And you'll notice the Yardley Inn up here on the top. So it's the Yardley section of the bridge that went out. Okay. A Bailey Bridge was put up to temporarily span the river. And there was a very high-spirited controversy whether the replacement bridge should be located at Afton Avenue, where the old bridge was, or moved north. The Yardley businessmen essentially wanted to stay at Afton Avenue, and the residents wanted it to be moved to the north because the larger replacement would have disrupted the Lake Afton property and would have destroyed the old library. Okay. Well, the northern alternative won because plans had already been in process to create a loop route around Trenton. And that loop route included a northern crossing. The Scudder's Falls Bridge was completed in 1961. And with the arrival of I-95, the area changed drastically. And that's interesting. I don't know where all those scribbles came from. Okay. A benefit of having the bridge being moved up was that the Yardley Public Library got an addition in 1959. Um, John M.L. Yardley had promised that if the bridge didn't go through town, he would contribute the money needed to put on an addition, which was much needed at the time. The Yardley Shopping Center took the place of the Yardley Methodist Church in 1959. There's a bit of lull in the development in Yardley until the coming of Yardley Commons in 1968. Originally 242 apartment units, and then they were converted to a condominium community. Wawa arrived in the early 1970s, and I couldn't find a picture of the Yardley Wawa, so I had to substitute this other one, and you can tell it's wrong because the Frito-Lay delivery truck is on the wrong side of the building. Um, Historic preservation triumphed when three homes that on Canal Street that were in the way of the Wawa parking lot were moved through the efforts of T. Sidney Cadwallader, a local attorney, Helen Leadham, who was the daughter of the coal and lumber yard owner, and Anna Mae Bakken, a Canal Street resident. And here are more of those scribbles. Huh. Gotta get rid of them. Um, the rapid development of Lower Makefield Township began in the 70s, and the town of Yardley responded. During the height of the housing boom in Lower Makefield Township, there were more than 20 real estate offices downtown. Okay. Today, the mix of uses has much improved. We have many service businesses, office, now retail, and restaurants. Okay. The response to flooding in Yardley, particularly the floods that took place in 2004, 5, 6, and 2011, um, led to the elevation of many homes in the flats and in the Rivermore neighborhoods, essentially using FEMA assistance money to do so. Okay. There's new development on old industrial sites. The 27-acre Cold Spring Bleachery property is now home to Yardley Walk townhouses. So, as always, Yardley is graced with the river, Lake Afton, and the Delaware Canal. The Yardley Historical Association took over the old library when the public library was moved to Lower Makefield Township in 1977. And we preserved the building, and we preserve a growing collection of books, documents, and ephemera related to Yardley history. And most of all, we endeavor to share it. So please come visit. December is coming. Actually, it starts in November 30th. The old library by Lake Afton is at its very, very prettiest during the holiday season. We have an open house on November 30th where the chief engineer of a big model train layout shows how a model train layout is put up. And then on December 7th, 14th, and 21st, we have open houses with the trains, with a tall fir tree decorated in old German ornaments and candles, homemade cookies, and we have Yardley gifts, tea towels, ornaments, candles, all sorts of good stuff. that you can give as gifts or you can keep yourself. So, do come visit. The old library by Lake Afton was created by the community. It exists because of community support. So we hope you'll consider becoming a member and helping us do the work that we need to do to keep this community treasure in good shape and a shining example of what the town is. And oh, I went a minute and 47 seconds longer. Shame on me. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And if you have any questions, you can unmute and ask them if you want to. And if not, we'll probably be doing this program again sometime so you can see it. And for some reason, um, anybody have any questions? Elizabeth?
This was absolutely brilliant, and the pictures are gorgeous. Thank you, thank you.
Good. No, I mean, we're fortunate that there are so many pictures of Yardley that have real personality. So, anybody else? Going once? Going twice? Um, Hope to see you soon. And come visit and check out our website, which I didn't include in that last slide, which is yardleyhistory.org. So, and our calendar's there and lots more good pictures and such. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Mhm.